So it's that time of evening again, and good evening and welcome to Goldsmiths School of Media, Communications and Cultural Studies. I'm Rashmi Roshanbal. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to the last edition, actually, this term of our Media Forum, which is a series of conversations that we lay on to discuss issues to do with news and current affairs coverage. And this topic that we have to hand is obviously very important and topical. And before I hand over to Goldsmiths Terry Kirby to introduce this sterling panel, I just wanted to say quickly that once we finish out here, we can continue the conversation outside over a glass of something and a cheese straw. So I'm going to now hand over to Terry.
That's all you're going to get.
That's all you're going to get.
You're getting a cheese.
You might get a crisp.
Oh, crisp as well, yeah. Goldsmiths.
We really love it.
I hate to disappoint you, but dinner's on this. Sure, good evening and welcome. I'm really pleased to be joined tonight by four seriously eminent people in the arts editing and arts criticism world. I'm very pleased they've been able to join us here tonight at Goldsmiths. Benedict is a cultural critic and broadcaster. He's a former arts columnist, theatre editor and associate art editor of The Independent. There is a bit of a thing with The Independent here. He's also a former arts editor of The Observer, and since 2006 has been chief London critic of Variety. As well as writing for various national publications and broadcasting on radio regularly, he's also a columnist and reviewer and writer for The Stage, which, for those of you who don't know, is the newspaper for the theatre and arts world in this country. For the weekly newspaper, I think I should say. My colleague here, Arifa Akbar, has been chief theatre critic of The Guardian since 2020, when she took over from Michael Billington. She's a former literary editor of The Observer, where she also worked as a news reporter with her colleagues in the newsroom and arts correspondent. She's the author of two books, the last of which, Wolf Moon, published in July, was serialised as the Book of the Week on Radio 4. She is leaving us early because duty calls. She has to be at the Jeremy Theatre to review something called David Copperfield, which is not Charles Dickens reading it. It's Tim Lisle is a pop critic and sports writer. Don't ask him about cricket because we've just had a mutual kind of weep over that. He started reviewing albums when he was 17, which was a year before I started reviewing albums, and he's still at it now, 46 years later. I moved from reviewing albums to reviewing wine bottles, which somehow represented my path through life. In the 80s, he interviewed bands for Smash Hits magazine before becoming the pop critic of the Daily Telegraph. And one always wonders what the pop world meant to the Daily Telegraph. Since 1999, he's been pop critic for the Mail on Sunday, arts editor he's also previously been arts editor of the Times and the Independent on Sunday, and he was editor of the Cricket Annual Wisdom and the editor of something called Independent Life magazine, which won Editor of the Year award. And since 1922, since 2020, I felt like a long time ago. Since 2022, he's been teaching here at Goldsmiths. So, folks, these people know their stuff. Lisa. I'm so sorry. Lisa worked at The Observer for over 3 decades, most recently as an associate editor of the New Review section, for also years as a reporter and features editor, feature writer and review editor. She's worked as an arts editor, looking after all the kind of Observer critics, film, music, theatre, visual art. She's now a contributing editor and writer on this new and I think quite exciting arts and culture and current affairs publication called The Know, which has been started by the former Observer review team. And I think that's one of those kind of new developments that is going to possibly be paving the way for journalism in the future. So Rashmi will be inviting you back for our annual media forum on the future of journalism. So with apologies for missing, Lisle, I'm going to start with you and I want you to talk about as an editor and as what is the worst written review you ever read? and we need names. Or aliases.
That's, oh gosh, I mean there's two categories I think. I mean there'll be ones from people who aren't very experienced, so they don't really know perhaps what they're doing, maybe just need a bit more practice, a bit more guidance. But then there's the very sort of big cheese reviewers who perhaps just sort of dash it off and send it in and aren't really used to having it sent back to them for a wash and brush up. I think there was...
I like washing the brush. I should remember that in future. My students. The phrase we used at the Independent after was a little light ironing. or to use the critic metaphor, the heavy roller.
And I think, I mean, if you've got a limited budget, which, believe it or not, we did have at the Observer, you don't really want to commission somebody to write a review and then just bin it. You know, I always feel it's worth sending it back, asking somebody to redo it, making a few points about what you think they could do differently. And there was one, I'm not going to name names, but a prominent historian who wrote a review on a history book. And I sent it back, I would say 4 times, and he still, every time, it just sort of really stayed the same. He didn't really take on board what I'd asked him to do, and eventually he just had to agree to bin it, and he forfeited his fee. But, I mean, that doesn't happen very often, but you know, that was quite savage.
Okay. So reviews are good and bad from the perspective of the reader and from the perspective of the editor. What about the perspective of the artist out there? How many have got back to you as reviewers to say that was an awful review, I'm going to come seek you out, I know where you live?
I've had hate mail.
You've had hate mail. Tell us about it.
I've been reviewing for about 25, 30 years, I think, and I've had 3 pieces of hate mail, 2 from the same person. I won't mention any names, but it's Dominic John Gould.
Everyone's had hate mail from this man.
He's legendary. He just
John Gould.
he used to run the Globe Theatre, Shakespeare's Globe, and is now a freelance director. And basically disliked anybody who took exception to any of his work and would write really vicious. It wasn't, you know, you don't know what you're doing and I dislike what you wrote. I mean, quite long, really, really singularly unpleasant letters to anyone that dared criticise his work.
Did you write back?
No, I think engaging is foolish because actually it's like when someone says something on social media and you take exception to it. Nothing, you can't change their minds. They're not there going, I'd like to engage with you intelligently on this topic. They're going, I hate you because of what you wrote, and therefore you trying to make your case is pointless.
And what's interesting about arts journalism is
Yeah.
that when I was on the news,
Speak up.
when I was on the news team
Yeah.
with you as the night editor at the Independent, we'd see it as a badge of honour if we got kind of a letter, hate letter, often in green ink. You know, that you could tell straight away that it was the days when it was a physical letter and an envelope, and it was the green ink, either red or green ink, and you knew this was an angry person. And as a news reporter, you were fine about it.
Yeah.
You were really happy if a PR, if the marketing department of wherever was unhappy with you. You sort of felt that you'd done your job.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about being a critic and being in this one specialism is that it's not taken the same way.
No.
So even I don't take it the same way. I've had, there's been stories of kind of physical attacks on theatre critics and on critics in general. I've written a whole piece. I presented a Radio 4 documentary this summer about criticism, and I spoke to a German woman, I don't know, you might have heard of her, a German dance critic, who a few years ago wrote a really negative review about a choreographer who she was at a theatre, and she was approached by him at the interval, and he has a little dasher with a dog, and he took out that dog's dog poo and smeared it, assaulted her basically. And even though we all sort of snigger a bit and sort of very English and laugh about it, it's actually an attack, it's a physical attack. So there have been those attacks, there's a long history of attacks. I've once or twice felt a bit threatened when a man has come up to me in an auditorium saying, "Are you Arifa Akbar? And you know, I think your reviews are so negative, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about that." But it's never got physical. The most, I think, insidious way is if somebody emails. I got what's equivalent of a green ink email, written all in lowercase letters, and it went on forever. It was never ending. We kept scrolling about how I'd damaged this director's sort of psychological well-being, and destroyed his mental health. And that really got to me, and I did engage, and I think since then, and that spirals. The minute you engage, you almost, I think it's the wrong thing to do. You've already engaged with the artwork, and with their what they created, you've engaged with it. As honestly, the only thing we can do is be honest. That's all you can be, is honest. I think you're doing your job. So if I've already engaged, that taught me a lesson never to engage, because I ended up saying, "I'm so sorry for destroying your mental health," and being quite kind of female about it, I think, apologetic and wanting to smooth things over. When from then on, I just kept a stony silence because I've already engaged.
Jim,
Well,
have you ever been bamboozled by Elton John or Jagger?
no, I don't think they take the slightest notice of what I write. I'm lucky to do pop in a way for the Mail on Sunday, because if you're a rock star, you're probably not a Mail on Sunday reader, and you certainly don't think the Mail on Sunday is at all cool. So that liberates me just to get on with giving my opinion. And funny enough, most of the reactions I get are really positive, which I wouldn't have expected 20 years ago. And the reason is because of Instagram. Because I put my reviews on Instagram, and if it's, unless it's a 1 star, I'll link to the artist's Instagram. And the smaller ones, and the nicer ones, the more polite ones, say, "Oh, thank you very much." And then they often repost it to their followers, and you pick up a few more followers. So we're sort of slightly more in the same business than we ever were back in the day. I've only had one dismayed reaction from a musician, and that was from Pete Townsend of The Who. Great songwriter and guitarist, as you know. He wrote to me on his own headed paper with his address at the top, which I thought was really classy. He wasn't bothered about giving me his address. Wrote by hand, and
in green ink?
no, in nice blue ink, proper ink, a fountain pen. And he said, "I have to say, I'm really incensed that you said that when I destroyed my guitar on stage the other day, it was premeditated. It was not. It was spontaneous." So that was okay.
I've got, I can remember one quite famous story in this level, which you might have heard about a writer who was very angry at a review that we carried in our pages. The review was by a writer called Nicky Gerard, who is now one half of Nicky French thriller writing duo, and she wrote a review of Jeanette Winterson's new book, which she suggested that Jeanette had lost her way as a writer, because Jeanette was sort of slightly in the literary doldrums, having started her career very successfully. And a couple of nights later, Nicky was giving a dinner at her home in Kentish Town, and Jeanette Winterson knocked on the door and gave her a dressing down on the doorstep in front of all her friends.
It takes effort, doesn't it? That takes
Yeah.
effort.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah,
I
yeah.
have had writers and directors and actors tell me they will never. Mira Sahel told me recently.
Yeah.
I asked her about stage fright. I was writing a piece. She said, "You just never forget the wording of even an overall positive review, but a negative line. You just do not forget those.
No, I know.
They're burned into you. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a certain kind of person to kind of go and find an address and turn up.
Yeah, it does. I have some personal experience with that because I published a book. I had a book published last year, and most of the, it's a fairly kind of niche area of journalism history, and most of the reviews were kind of pleasant and complimentary, and they may have made some criticism. But the guy from the Daily Telegraph actually clearly researched me and dug out some small piece I'd written for the Evening Standard 15 years ago and held it against me as proof of my authority over the history of journalism. I just felt, hasn't he got something better to do?
That might be called rigour, though.
It could be called. He didn't seem to prove a particular point.
I do think it's very healthy to have. I mean, I was an actor and I was a director and I am a singer, so I know what it's like to be reviewed. I don't think it necessarily doesn't make me any better, but it makes me aware of what I'm saying and the impact it might have. I remember going to see a terrible production of John Osborne's play The Entertainer at Hampstead, and the leading actor is now not well and is still with us, obviously, so I won't name him. But as I was writing the review, I wrote Michael X. Audiences could consider suing under the in The Entertainer. Audiences could consider suing under the Trades Prescriptions Act. And I went, you know what? That's funny, but it's actually unkind. There are other ways of saying he's miscast and he's not good, and I took it out. And I think that's probably because I knew what it was like to get someone, because in print, we type and it goes out there. It reads like it's written in stone, and if it's a bad review, it's like a gravestone. And you should be aware of that. Doesn't mean you're going to change your opinion, but I think it's good to know what it feels like on the other hand.
I mean, that review with me, out of all the reviews, that's the one that I remember rather than the kind of nicer reviews, and so it does stay with you. But it's interesting you have that experience. You've not been your books are reviewed.
My books have been reviewed a lot. So my first book was heavily reviewed, and so was the second. And that in itself is an achievement, because nowadays you'll know as former books editor, you get sackloads of things as a books editor, and sackloads
so
of
many books,
and it's a fraction that gets reviewed. So because I'm aware of that, we should be grateful that we got reviews at all online.
Yes.
But then amongst them, interestingly, so if I see it as, if I'm a critic and I can give it, I need to be able to take it. I also think one of the crucial things that I always try and remember with criticism is you owe, the honesty, but you owe that artist, whether it's a novelist or a theatre, a performance production, you owe them an engagement. You owe them in engaging with whatever ideas are being discussed. And I say that because I'm afraid I read reviews that do not engage. They describe and appraise, but they actually skirt around. Maybe it's too hard. Maybe they're pulling their punches. Maybe, for whatever reason, they're sitting on the fence. They're not really grappling with the thing that needs to be grappled with. So when I got my books reviewed, I noticed those reviews. I was really offended by reviews that described the book and added a few sentences, words like poignant and moving, and those words. And I thought, what is this? I don't understand who this person is, what they're trying to hide. There's something so opaque there, because for me, a review is a critical appraisal, interpreting whatever work you see, evaluating, saying, connecting with it, or saying why you don't connect with it, why it's a disconnect. It's really exposing of you, in a sense, about your taste and your powers of analysis and the way you interpret things. So I noticed quite a few reviews didn't do that, and I really appreciated the reviews that did, even when they said something a bit negative. There's a theatre director called Peter Brook who said that at some, with the best kind of criticism, it enlightens the artist. We're not opposing. This traditional idea is, the rock star, Peter Townsend is, you're the antagonist to him. You are his enemy. You're always going to be in two different camps. But Peter Brook said, at its best, criticism enlightens and actually can add to the artist's sort of understanding of their craft. And I saw that in those reviews, when I'd written my book, there were things that were on the book, there were things on the fringes that I knew weren't quite right, or I knew I was getting at but hadn't articulated. And the really keen reviewers had got that. They'd spotted that there was an inconsistency or a weakness, or spotted something, patterns in the book that I hadn't, and I thought, oh yeah, that's what I was trying to say. And this person is such a sensitive reader that they've spotted it, and that's really enlightened me about my own work. And there was, just to finish off, in my last book, which was about darkness and how we fear it and how women travel through, darkness in the night, particularly Sarah Everard, blah, blah. There was a negative review. It was in the Irish Times, and I was absolutely fascinated by this single negative review.
Yeah.
She just took she just didn't like the book. She didn't believe in its earnestness. She said I was putting on this liberal earnestness of some Guardian writer. And I was fascinated by her and by this approach. And I thought, good on you, because, not everyone's going to like what you do, and that is par for the course. That is just part of.
That's
Verdi said it very well. The 19th century opera composer Verdi was asked how the reviews were for one of his middle period operas, can't remember which ones are relevant, and he said the bad reviews were terrible and the good ones were worse. Which is a really, really good line, and it's true. There's actually no virtue as an artist in getting a great review from someone, and you read it and you go, they don't know anything, and then saying that it's marvellous is very good for the ego for 10 seconds, and then afterwards you go, yeah, but it's meaningless.
Yeah. And it's those, you're right, it's the good review that actually says something that might even enlighten you, that is really has thought and engaged with your ideas or your whatever you're doing, that they've really gone in and engaged and been penetrating. And those are. I mean, I got a few of those, and I was absolutely. One of them was in the Observer, the first book, and I thought, oh, thank you. That actually, you really spent time here. You thought deeply.
Can we then move on? We were talking about the good reviews and the bad reviews. Tim, first of all, what actually makes in the writing of it? Bear in mind we have many journalism students here. What do you need to do to create a good review? What are the constituent elements of a good review?
You need to spend 10,000 hours writing. Not necessarily 10,000 hours on the subject that you are writing about. A question I quite often get asked is, when you're reviewing gigs and so on, so can you sing or can you play guitar? And I can't do either of those things to save my life. But all the time that the musicians I watch, all the time they poured into learning the guitar or playing sax or whatever, singing, I spent writing and reading reviews and just plugging away at it. So that's the first thing. You need a strong point of view, as Arifa said. You can't be wishy-washy. You can't sit on the fence. The star system doesn't have. In a way, it does help us here because there's nothing more boring than seeing 3 stars at the top next to who's always disappointing these days, sadly. I give him one or two stars every time now. And he wisely decided on his current tour of the UK not to give critics tickets at all.
That's interesting.
No prestige.
But actually, this is a scary development because one or two theatre productions are doing the same because for whatever they say it's a short run, but I think it's because they fear, because it's a short run, they fear a negative review will just leave all the tickets unsold. And this is one of the dangers of how marketing is almost sometimes some fields like film bypassing criticism and maybe going to influences in other ways, because we to some degree don't facilitate the selling of things always.
We'll come back to that point in a minute. So,
Yeah,
so overview, the strong point of view.
Yeah, strong point of view, lots of practice going into it from way back.
Knowledge.
Bit of knowledge, not too much knowledge necessarily, but an attempt to entertain the reader and to write some good lines.
Yeah.
I think you try and make the sentences sing. That's really important. Because if you can do that regularly, the master of this was Clive James in the Observer, a TV critic in the 70s. He was so much fun to read. You didn't have to watch the programme. You didn't have to be very interested in telly. He was just a rollicking good read every Sunday, and you kept coming back to him. And later Anthony Lane was saying in his film reviews in the New Yorker. Many other critics down the years. Dorothy Parker seems to, I would love to have been alive at the time when she was doing her reviews. One of her reviews went something like, this book should not be put aside lightly. It should be hurled with great force into the waste paper basket.
So, Lisa, what makes a great review? What review have you read when you get anything that makes you think, so I think this is brilliant? What are the bits in it that work, that engage the reader?
I think it's really important to have all reviews to be in context rather than just in isolation. When you're talking about the review which just summarises the book and then puts words, which is that's not doing the job properly, not providing the service to the reader. I think one of my favourite ever reviewers was Philip French, the Observer film critic, and he was the Observer's film critic for 35 years, and he had an absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of films. I would say to him, not too much knowledge. Philip
Make an exception for Philip.
A massive amount of knowledge of films, and his reviews were always absolutely stuffed with references to films from the 1970s, maybe the 1930s, the 60s, other which had similar themes or similar sorts of actors, and we used to have quite a lot of fun on the review desk when Philip's reviews came in to sort of toss up exactly how many references he actually made, because there seemed to be more and more every week. But that was something that I think it sort of made reading his reviews a very sort of enriching experience, because you just felt like you were finding out so much more than just about the film. And I think also placing the review, it places the artwork, whether it's a film or book or whatever, in a sort of wider political, cultural context as well. That's something that I like in reviews as an editor.
Context, knowledge, a turn of phrase.
Yeah.
David?
I realise that I don't reread reviews that I've written very often. But sometimes something comes up and you'll go, oh, actually, I remember there's a production of Othello on at the moment, which I've yet to see. But I was reminded of a production of Othello at the Donmar with Ewan McGregor and Chiwetel Ejiofor and Kelly Riley that Michael Brown directed. And I thought, I wonder what I said about that. And I went back and read it. And I thought, what's interesting to me about my own review, pardon the vanity, is that it works as a review because I've got an argument, and I suddenly realised that's what a good review for me is. You have an argument with what you went to see. It isn't just I went to see this play and this happened and X was in it and this was good and I liked it. Goodbye. That's of no interest. unless you're absolutely desperate to see the show and you just want a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that sort of review is of no interest to me. I want to have an argument with that which I have gone to see, and I think the reader wants that. Whether or not they've ever thought of it in those terms, you actually want to read something that drives through with a controlling idea.
Yes.
So I would
Yeah.
say an argument. Adam Mars-Jones, who was a
Yeah.
brilliant critic at the Independent,
I think yeah.
his father was a judge, and he said, there's no sort of burden of being right or wrong. You know, like the person who says a classic film is or says Waiting for Godot when it was at first staged, what a mess. This is what a failure. Or one of Pinter's biggest plays is saying, God, that's awful. You know, there have been plenty of critics who have got it wrong, but he said, Adam Mars-Jones said, there's absolutely no responsibility to get it right or wrong. That's not our job. Our job is, like his father, to present a really refined for or against argument, like a court winding up. So make that argument as seductively as you can to the reader. So that, but I would also say what I love about certain people's reviews is insight and sensitivity. They've noticed something that is kind of delicious, it's like quite subtle, and they've noticed, so you kind of think, God, this critic is noticing the detail of things, whether it's a riff, whether it's somebody's facial expressions, whether it's the way somebody walks, that's really on, liminal almost. It's, of course, there are the main themes and the main ideas to discuss, but this person's kind of brings a wisdom or insight that's beyond. That's just part of that person's kind of perception, and so you kind of feel admiration for that person because they're just keen observers, they're brilliant listeners, they're just they pick up things like anybody who's got insight that you're talking to, you think, oh, this is really penetrating stuff. And that's hard to do when, some of us are reviewing within hours of I review within 2 hours of a show. I'm sure you do sometimes.
Only in Glastonbury.
Yeah. And I quite regularly come out of the theatre, fairly regularly, come out of the theatre at 9:30, and the copy has got to be sent latest 11:15. So
That is proper journalism.
That's
So
sensible.
you don't have time for the ideas to percolate.
You don't have time to change your mind. I remember seeing a show at the Royal Court by the American writer Phyllis Narge, and because she was quite a big cheese at that point, all the dailies reviewed it, but it was a 3-act play with 2 intervals, so it came down very late. And part of the problem with the play was that Act 1, the play looked like this, and then Act 2, the play looked like that, and then Act 3, it looked like that. So I could see the Daily Telegraph critic starting to write in the first interval because he knew he wouldn't have much time. And then I realised, he's probably had to change his mind about everything he wrote each time an act ended, and then he had to file by 11. And all the daily reviews were kind of good but not great, and the Sunday reviews, where people had time to digest it and go, oh my God, look at the way Act 3 makes us think about the rest of the play. The Sunday reviews were good.
This is why you need to read the Sunday paper.
But that's very interesting. The culture of the instant review is a relatively recent thing, isn't it?
No, actually.
No.
So my predecessor, Michael Billington,
Used to do it.
used to phone it. Do you remember the days of news journalism?
Oh, I've phoned it.
We started doing it on the Independent. I mean, when I say relatively new, I mean in the last sort of 30 years or so.
That's true.
In my recent experience, before you were born.
Yes.
Yeah.
Back in the day, in those old films where the critic, everyone's waiting for the notices the next
That's
day.
right. Yeah. So it was. Well, that's what I was. Did it actually happen in the 1920s and 30s?
I think it did.
I don't think they're like. I don't know whether.
Because it's the famous scene
You see, I mean, you watch This Girl Friday, which was made in 1940. All the journalists, there's a news story, and all the journalists rush to the phone and read their copy down the phone. And I remember reviewing Philip Schofield in Dr. Dolittle, which was at the Hammersmith Apollo, and the fastest route to a bad review is open a show late. So it was supposed to start at 7 and it started at 7:30 and the show finished and I had to, this was before we had laptops, and I had to sit in the box office and dictate a 600-word review to a copy taker in Leeds. So you had to spell everything, yes. And Philip Schofield, Philip, etc. And you do it in an hour, and it's just mad.
Well, that's a news reporting skill that we all used to do. My autobiography, if I ever wrote it, would be the copy taker's lament. Is there much more of
Oh
this?
yeah, that's right. So when I was news reporting and I would have to phone it in the early days when I was young and independent, I just remember sort of, that A-level crisis meltdown, I don't think I can go, that sort of feeling where it's over, I've messed it, I may as well give up now. That desperate feeling that I'm sure everybody's had, that A-level crisis feeling, always hit me like a wave.
Yeah.
And then you somehow have to push on and put that copy through.
You have
just
to do it.
somehow to
And
finish
you're doing that tonight for the review.
Tonight I'm not. But
You're not.
can I just say that weirdly now, like 30 years later, because this is 30 years on, from those early days, weirdly, I feel really adrenalised and absolute clarity when I write, and I find it quite exciting. I still have those moments of meltdown when it's a really tricky, like one of the plays, it's so tricky in its ideas that I think I have so much to say and things haven't quite settled. What was the meaning of that? What was the meaning of that? But on the whole, your brain somehow is grappling with it while you're watching it, and you're making sense because you have to articulate everything and you want to do it justice. So I weirdly find it exciting.
No, sorry, go on.
I'm just going to say I'm really impressed by that, because I get that feeling of absolute clarity about twice a year.
I never remember who I go to the theatre with. I usually go with somebody, and I literally have said to so many people, "Have you seen such and such?" Yes, I was with you. Because I go and I sit there, and the lights go down, and I go, right, I'm now going to try and remember every single damn thing that happens for the next 2.5 hours. And so the person sitting next to me, I'll remember that I have a drink with them at some play or whatever, but literally I'm focused so hard, and it is an adrenaline.
Yeah.
This is a big way that you theatre critics have a more difficult life than I do, because I can take my notes on my phone at nearly every beat.
Oh no, but we
Apart from Bob Dylan.
Yes. Phone in the pouch.
No, you have to put it in a pouch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you won't give your press ticket anyway, so.
No.
But I take notes in the dark too.
But you can't do them on your phone.
Oh no, I can't.
If they're on the phone, then you've written half the
You've written
piece.
half the piece, you're right. There is this.
Because it's automatically in your Gmail.
Yeah. There is a trick where I'm sure everybody who's had to file on the night has tried it, where before you go into a show at 7, by 6 o'clock you've already got you've got 2 paragraphs summarising the story.
I know, because it has more than 2 paragraphs.
That's written.
Yeah.
But every time I've
He
done
gets the
that,
early train home. And he writes premeditated paragraphs, which are good enough to get away with.
that's so every time I've done that though, those summary, those holding paragraphs, they've seemed wrong on
Yes.
coming out.
Yeah.
That's not the way into the story. That those they just don't seem right.
Does the prospect of a deadline concentrate
Yes,
the mind?
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
And that's a journalistic trope. But when it comes to writing that review at 11 o'clock tonight or any other night, do you think you produce better work than when Tim can sit there on a Saturday or
In
whenever?
some ways, when
Press day is Wednesday.
Wednesday. But you've got the luxury of time a bit more.
A bit more, but I'm doing the albums of the year tomorrow. I haven't been given a length yet. I've got about 15 in mind.
Right. Okay.
We'll probably have to whittle them down to 10, and that will all happen tomorrow. So actually, even in the weekly life, there's a bit of an essay crisis at the end.
Yeah, and work expands into the time allotted. If you've got a week to write something, I edited Susanna Clapp, who I think is one of the best critics out there in any form, and you know, it used to drive me mad because it's like, Susanna, the last show you saw was Wednesday. It's Friday morning and you still haven't got your copy here. You've had all this time. I am used to writing in an hour. But it's, yeah, without a deadline, it takes me forever.
Okay. Qualitative stuff. Does a poor piece of art, whether it's a painting or a book or a record or a stamp or a piece of theatre or art or music, can that make for a better piece of writing?
Yes and no, which is the dull answer. The word, actually, I would answer that by saying it's the so-so work that gets the worst writing.
Really?
If you go and see something and you're enraged by how shit it is, then off you go. And similarly, it's harder to write well about really good work because you can't see the joins. If something is flawless, without just gushing, trying to take it apart and explain to a reader why this is so good is really hard.
Yeah.
What I find totally depressing is going to see something and you sit there and you go, oh, I knew this creative team were unlikely to come up with anything great because they haven't in the past, and actually this is mediocre from start to finish and no one is outstanding in it, and how on earth am I going to fill the space to say it? And that's the really difficult one.
Yeah. And in your experience?
I think the same, yeah.
But,
I think if thinking of books, thinking back to the books desk, if the reviewer really hates the book, then it's a chance often to be very funny and witty about it, as long as it's, if it's a sort of slightly trivial book, or any kind of book, it's a chance for humour, which can make for a really good read. And if it's a wonderful book, it risks being a bit gushy because they love it so much. But then the mediocre books or the sort of okay books, you don't want to really, what can you say?
What can you say?
It's harder to.
See, that's interesting because I find the negative review easy to write because it's so, especially if it's offended me in its politics or in the way it's staged or in the book, in its ideas, because there's clarity there and you go in for the kill, and it's then up to you whether to add that sort of suddenly bitchy or kind of waspishness. It's up to you then what line you cross, and I try not to cross that line, line of unkindness. But when something deserves unpicking, then I think, okay, no, I'm going to get the gloves off and I'm just going to go in for this, but not in a personal kind of.
There's also an evaluation about work that merits being slaughtered. If you go and see something on the fringe and it doesn't work, and you go, no one's being paid very much. This isn't an arrogance. This is just they tried, it didn't work. And even if you had a pretty miserable time, it ill behoves you to dump on it from a great height. If, however, you go and see something and you go, this has got bazillions behind it, and it's being marketed to death, and people are being wooed to go and see it, and being sort of suggested by marketing that it's great, and actually it's junk, then I have no compunction about.
It's cynical, and I'll go in for it. I agree with you.
So you're gonna look at something, say at the National Theatre or in the West End that's being overrun.
Exactly, like Disney money in it. And
Right.
you just think, come on then, look, what is this? But
You're going to take a higher put a higher bar on that than you would
yes, because they've had all
the
the
Guildford Street Theatre that you're saying tonight.
Exactly, but I would say this, I disagree with you both in the 5-star review. So I love writing 5-star reviews.
Oh, so do I.
Yeah, I have loads to say because it
They're
gives, they're the best. Not because I can get to gush, because that's actually quite boring. There's only so many ways of saying this is really good. But if something's really good, and I've had this, it leaves you gasping. The end might have happened, but you're so arrested or kind of winded that you can't. You're still sitting in your seat. This happened happened to me a few days ago. I went to see Arthur Miller's All My Sons. I don't particularly like Arthur Miller. I think that Arthur Miller is really wooden on stage, often in its realism. And this production, which had Brian Cranston, Papa Asidou, and various other, Marianne Jean-Baptiste, it blew me away to the point where I thought, oh, I see the themes in this that I didn't see before, and then suddenly this play that was written in 1946 is talking about Trump. It's talking about truth and lies. It's talking about faulty PPE. Like, how can it be talking to me with such clarity? It's because of it's the brilliance of it. So then, suddenly, what a really good thing does is gives you new insight into something that you thought you knew, and that actually bored you a bit. And so I suddenly will have loads to say about how they did that. I think, how did they do that? And that engages me. Like, out of sort of maybe envy, like, how on earth did they do something? Like with books, I have this, because I try and create them. So when I read an amazing book, I want to kind of dismantle it, to try and figure out how this person has done it, which is actually quite intellectually difficult to do. And just seeing a production in the theatre that gives you new knowledge and insight, and just emotionally takes transports you. There was a show called Iphigenia in Splot by Gary Owen. That was so good. It was about a Welsh, working class, a young woman from the underclass in a place called Splot, just outside of Cardiff, and she's yappy, she's all tough, streetwise, but there's a really tragic story beneath it. And at the end, I literally couldn't get up off my seat from the theatre. People were clapping and standing ovation. It was a sort of tearfulness, sorrow that stayed with me for the rest of the day and the rest of the night and the next day. And so that's
what we're looking
such a
for.
strong response.
Yeah, we want things to move us to tears. And it's wonderful when they do, and then, as you say, you try and capture what it was, what was the secret sauce here.
Yeah. And if you can bring that to the reading, then it makes wonderful reading. Yeah.
But also, that's also putting your personal into it, isn't it? There's a sort of line where you bring the personal into it and the effect on you, as opposed to a more distanced and objective criticism. Do you balance that as critics, or do you just let it all come out and not really think about that?
I think there are critics that absolutely remove themselves, who I don't particularly want to read. Because you go, in fact, there are certain critics that won't applaud performances, which I think is spectacularly rude. They've been working in front of us. The least you can do is clap. But I'm not sure that the critics are still practicing.
For what it's worth, the cricket writers don't applaud.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
It's sort of a faux pas, which I committed on my first day in the press box.
Interesting.
Got some dirty looks for that.
You don't do that yet.
Okay, we talked about the sort of performing arts a lot. What about the static arts, as it were, the books and has anyone, have there been kind of painters come, Damien Hirst ever kind of taken on the Observer for or the Guardian for a poor review by, what's his name, Jonathan Jones? Well, I remember reading it, slagging off the butterfly pictures.
Well, famously, Ben Lewis was a writer at the Evening Standard. I talked to him during the Radio 4 documentary I went to interview him, and he famously started writing, critical pieces about Damien Hirst back in the day, 20 years ago, with the YBA's Young British Artists.
Who started here?
Who started here. Who did an MA in art here, and all sort of mushroomed. And Damien Hirst, in the noughties, was just commanding insane prices for his artwork, and the artwork was made in workshops, spin paintings that his workshop was creating. It's like the old art workshop system, but still, this was madness. And Ben Lewis started looking at the writing behind visual art and was uncovering stuff and was asserting things. And he got banned by Damien Hirst's company called Science. That was his production company. And he was banned from the show, from attending art press views, which is it's outrageous, really quite immoral. And you know, the whole arguments, Ben carried on writing and being quite outspoken about it, but that's the thing that sticks in my mind. In books, I think I've been the books world is a funny world where you end up at literary parties or the Booker Prize shortlist, the Booker Prize party or dinner or whatever, and you know, sometimes you're sat next to your nemesis, or you see across the room the person you know you gave a really negative review to coming towards you. So it's such a small world.
It's interesting though, because you're right, the literary world does work like that, but it's interesting that other art forms don't. It's sort of crowd of theatre world. I mean, I years ago worked with Ian McKellen, and he's the one person that when I started becoming a critic, he sort of went, I'm going to have to maintain distance from you, because you're now writing it. And I thought, well, ironically, you're the one person probably doesn't have to worry. I'm unlikely to give you a bad review. But on the whole, it's sort of novelists review novelists, and actors do not review actors. There's a separation.
That's a good
There is
point.
a separation.
And there is
There
that-
needs to be.
There is that sense of incestuousness in the literature. Well, you found that also. One thing I wanted to ask you particularly as an editor is, just moving on, you're going to see tonight a kind of fringe production at the very small in theatre. That was it an Edinburgh fringe production or a?
No,
But it's a
tiny theatre in Piccadilly. It's
Seat 70.
Seat 70. It's a small production, small company.
It's a small company,
Yeah.
but you're going to review them on behalf of great national institutions. But how hard do the more fringe, the minor artists, you know, the struggling bands, have to get a review in the Mail on Sunday or get their work appreciated in something like this, a new review? I mean, are critics, you know, in danger of just focusing on the established canon because of limitation of space, time,
I think
the rest of it?
there is always a danger of that, but I think there is a kind of impetus to discover new people, new writers, and to bring new books to the readers. We've got a whole, at the Observer, Personal Edit paper, a whole sort of range of reviewers out there in the world who are all like reading books ahead of their publication all the time. So if they trusted reviewers were to come to me and say, I've read this debut novel by Mrs. X, it's fantastic, you really need to give it the time of day, then you would do that, I think. I think that's how we first heard about Sally Rooney.
Right,
It was good, like way ahead of publication from somebody who said this is fantastic. And on the Observer also there is a feature which I introduced as a literary editor, which is the debut novelist of the year, where we sort of, big up who we think who's going to be big. And there's a sort of an unwritten rule that if you do have a debut novel their book comes before you and you send it out to a critic and they really don't like it, they think it's awful, you just don't touch it because it's just not fair to give a bad review to a new person.
How does it work at the moment?
Well, I put my hand up because I realised after about 20 years of doing this weekly review for the Mail on Sunday that actually I only ever cover two categories of music, which are the biggest and the best. That's all it is.
That's all
If Madonna's playing at the O2, or the Stones are playing at Wembley, or whoever's playing at Glastonbury, I have to do that, obviously, because loads of people are interested in that. 4 million people apply for tickets for Glastonbury, so you have to write about it, even though we're a week late with most of our reviews from it. But the other bit of the job is to find the best stuff, as Lisa said. And often it is an unknown name, and it's really exciting when you come across it. Last week I reviewed an album by a guy called David Keenan, who I hadn't heard of 3 weeks ago. And his PR, who I trust, said, got something special here, hoping you'll give it a go. And that PR wouldn't say something special if he didn't mean it. You know, so I trust him, and I wouldn't have reviewed it if I hadn't agreed. David Keenan is an Irish poet who kind of writes songs on the side, and the best of his songs, they start like a poem, and then they kind of take off into a song you can imagine being sung by 10,000 people in a marina. It's really good.
Right.
He's got some magic. So
It is really thrilling when you discover. I was discovered in terms of the voice, and I remember going to see a play at the National, and knowing absolutely nothing about it, but it was directed by Peter Gill, who's got the best ear in British theatre, and works really, really well with very, very good actors who are not household names. So I thought the chances are, this isn't going to be junk, because Peter Gill wouldn't have done it. But I just remember kind of a shiver going up my spine about 20 minutes in and going, oh my God, this is a real writer. This is really exciting. It's going places I didn't expect. It's doing things I hadn't bargained for. I don't know where it's going, but I feel completely safe in the playwright's hands. And moments like that are just thrilling. And it's one of the great privileges of being a critic, is you get to see it first. By the time I've written about it, and then hopefully some people have read it, and then they book tickets, they've already been primed that it's good. Whereas we get to sit there and go, it might be terrible. Oh my God, it's great. It's an amazing experience.
And that is, I think, one of the privileges of it. Okay, we need to move on, but before we get to questions, I've got just 2 very brief things I'll ask you to do very quickly. Right. First of all, what's your most 5-star review? Your biggest and best 5. Your one that went up to 6, rather. That's a reference to Spinal Tap.
My review is great.
Yeah. And what's your 0-star review?
There's a tour that's been going on for 4 years because it's so successful by Coldplay, and most pop critics are not big Coldplay fans. And every single critic that I've seen has given that tour 5 stars because the show is so good. And the thing that great pop concerts do, which is bringing a big crowd together and filling them with communal joy, Coldplay find a way of doing that, a different way, in each song.
Yeah.
And it's just a phenomenal show. And I reviewed it 4 summers running, and there was always something new to say about it. So
That's the same one that was in Glastonbury 2 years ago.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was a version of it.
That was a version of it. And your 0-star review?
Well, it would be Bob Dylan, but I'll give him 1 because he's Bob Dylan. He's terrible live. Don't go and see him. Don't waste your money.
I enjoyed him last week. But it's Bob. You go there for play trivia. It's not
Each to their own.
Your 5-star and 0-star.
5-star. I mean, I've got a very bad memory, so this one, I'll mention 2 that I've seen in recent few years. A play called The Years it was based on a book by Annie Arnaud, who's a Nobel Prize-winning French novelist. And this book, she does autofiction, so it's really about her. And this book is about a woman through her entire life, a lifespan of an ordinary French woman's life, from boyfriends to abortion to growing old to discussing politics at dinner party, all of it, just all of that business. And she writes, with such, it's very economical, and her books are always usually quite slim. So I thought, how are they going to do that? And in the theatre, they used 5 female actors, to play this one woman, because this idea was we are different people through different stages of our lives. And it was so original, and there was music, and the way they transposed it in the theatre was so clever and so emotional and this was famously last year's play where people kept fainting in the theatre because of this one, Romola Garai was playing this woman when she was at the age where she had an abortion, and you didn't see anything. It was, everything was kind of implicated in how her face and how she stood, and it's amazing that scene had such power because she was doing very little. That literally men and women were fainting every night.
I think it was more men that fainted
But
than
apparently it was women too.
yeah, I was there. I mean,
Did you faint?
no. I'm a crime reporter. I don't faint. I was cheering.
Yeah.
That was brilliant.
It's a brilliant play, but I suppose the other play this year has been Much Ado About Nothing by Jamie Lloyd. If you saw that, it had Tom Hiddleston and Hayley Atwell, and it was total joy. And it was an enormous West End stage.
It was a rock concert.
It was a rock concert.
Well,
It was a rock
quickly, because
concert
we're running out
with
of time, we all have to go. So what's your zero star?
Zero star, something to do with Disney, I think. Maybe it was a play called Prince of Egypt. It was based on the cartoon.
I don't do star ratings, but if I'd had them,
Yeah.
I would have.
It was like someone, or the other one by Ben Elton, Queen, the musical.
We Will Rock You.
We Will Rock
Yeah,
You.
we back the observer.
So one of those big stadium, wanting to be a rock concert show,
Yes.
which has money, millions thrown at it, the guitar and the amps and everything, and it's like earth-crashingly loud and bad. Like, such expensive mistakes that you think, how could that have got away with being this bad and nobody coming in and saying, actually, this is a disaster, we need to start again?
I hope you said that.
Yes.
Lisa.
Well, I'm not a reviewer, so I don't write.
But you go to
write
the theatre.
stuff. Oh, to the theatre? Oh, well, actually, I mean, you've stolen my favourite play, which was The Years.
Yeah.
And what have I seen that was in? I'll tell you what I saw, which was awful the other week. I don't know what you thought of it, but it was The Maids at the Donmar.
Oh, you see, this is Marmite, so this is one of the...
I hated it.
And I loved it.
I loved it.
And see, it's funny, isn't it?
I loved it. I was a bit wary.
I was
Sorry, we're just talking amongst ourselves.
That's it.
We'll allow time for questions
This
in a
is the
minute.
best thing about
Yeah.
this reminds me that critic, it is a subjective thing, and it's all about
Yes,
your argument.
exactly.
The animals don't. It's about launching your argument about why this is so bad.
The one thing we haven't said, picking up from that point, is that the business of being a critic is that on a newspaper, is that you are the critic, and people read you. So I haven't seen The Maids. I hate that play. Every Friday my being, I don't want to see it again. But the point is that some people love it, some people hate it. But the point is that people who routinely and regularly read you know what your taste is, and therefore can make a judgment. You don't have to agree with the review, but knowing that Tim always likes that kind of band, so I'm going to go and see that kind of band because Tim likes it, guides you as much as the individual review, and that's important.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it is just unfettered opinion. It's like TripAdvisor.
Yeah.
This is the best restaurant I've ever been to. You go, how many restaurants have you been to? And who are you? Whereas we know who Tim is, we know who Arifa is, and therefore you can judge.
What's your zero star?
My
Anything.
zero star. Well, that would be The Maids.
No, well,
I
that was
literally-
the Maids. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
I literally made my flesh crawl.
I loved it. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
I walked out of the woman from the sea.
Did you? People
Anyway, there we go. Dave, I'm not.
My worst,
Your first one.
my worst, which actually encouraged me to write probably the review I'm most proud of in terms of actually, I know that it's funny, people have told me it's funny, was I went to see a production of Carmen, Bizet's opera, on ice. I'll leave you with that. It was magnificently terrible in every single aspect. It was glorious to write.
But you suddenly, even those really, it's so bad it's good. You do sit there thinking, this is, you just...
Most bad shows are so bad they're bad and boring.
Yeah, exactly.
Carmen on Ice was not boring.
And your 5 star.
Oh God, my 5-star experiences actually are often things from way back. Carol Churchill's Top Hills, the original production of that. I remember sitting in the theatre for 10 minutes afterwards, I couldn't get out of my seat. The last scene was so emotional, and the play just did everything to my brain. It was just extraordinary.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, questions please. Those at the back can speak up. Arifa's going to have to shoot off quite shortly. 5 minutes. So anything specifically for Arifa? Yes.
Just for all of you. So I have a question. Like, they say that bad PR, it's also PR sometimes, even better. Do you have your own experience, or maybe your colleagues' experience, that after very critically bad review, more people actually wanted to come and see the concert, performance, or exhibition?
The producer's phenomenon.
I was just going to say, Bob Dylan's still selling out.
I think it can go two ways with theatre. One, that show closes very quickly after all the bad reviews come out.
Yeah.
That's a real correlation. It's not made up. That does happen.
Yeah, we don't have that power in the pop world.
But I think it also works the other way, where critically, a show has been panned, but commercially, it's a real hit. So there are some shows that just people think, no, I'm going to go. Yeah,
The Devil Wears Prada was critic. Yes, it's a terrible show. It got some polite reviews, but no good reviews, and you can't get it because it's been marketed like mad, and it's a known title. And if you're going to spend a ridiculous amount of money it costs to go to the West End, then you want to go and see something that sort of guarantees you're going to have a good time. So you're not going to go and see a show you've never heard of. Everybody knows what The Devil Wears Prada is. You can remember the film, and therefore people are going.
Just some things that Arifa said. Do you think? Sometimes I think that it's possible to say there's an element of objectivity. It's not all subjective opinion in reviewing. Sometimes, I used to write little book reviews, non-fiction things, and I tried to refer to things that were actually in the object, in the book itself, rather than just go, I didn't like it and all that, who cares what I like. But you can identify some things either in there, and there's quite a lot of objectivity that is available. It's not really a subjective game. And even in art critic, like Brian Sewell used to write very funny reviews, but he would try and describe what the thing's like, but also we'd put a context, which is another way of doing it. And people going on about how innovative some YBAs were, he'd be going, well, the thing is, this was done in the 1950s, this was already, we'd be able to contextualize it with good art history and show that there was nothing to shout about in this case. So, and that's a sort of objective criticism, if you like. You know what I mean? It's trying to be historical and point to things that are really there.
It's always a bit of both, I would say.
Yeah.
Sorry, well, the rest to read to you.
No, it was just off that what you said earlier on about.
I think it is a bit of both, and I think the context, being an informed critic, means you're going to bring more than just your analysis of the show, that context, that knowledge. So that's not subjective. That's making correlations and comparisons and adding value to this by adding your knowledge. I think it's not all subjective. Some of it's just formal analysis, and you can see where the story goes wrong formally, the craft of it. But I would say then something else kicks in. So my favourite ever novel is Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights, even though I absolutely love it, I can see that at the end it just tapers off. It's just badly the ending goes all wrong. There's a rather generous. She does something that I think is formally quite messy. If I didn't emotionally relate to it, I could see that it was imperfect. But actually, sometimes for me, that imperfection doesn't matter. So then your subjective comes back in. So it's an interplay between the two, I think.
But I think it is mistakenly assumed by people that don't see the point of critics. The line is, oh, but it's just one person's opinion. You go, well, yes, it is. Except that some opinions carry more weight than others because they're backed up by knowledge. And I can look at things and go, this is badly staged. It would be more effective if they came on down centre, right to the front. and actually you've sort of hidden them behind a pillar, and this scene isn't working, and it could work, and I know that because I know how to take a scene apart because I've directed scenes and I've been in scenes, and there's plenty of material about which I don't know as much as other people in the history of plays or whatever it is I'm reviewing, but I have had my hands dirty. I can analyse what I'm seeing and look at how it could have been better, or good grief, I would never have imagined that it could have been as wonderful as that, and I'll explain why. I think it's a much more objective business. Of course, your taste and your emotions are in there, but I think good criticism, bad criticism is just unfettered opinion. But good criticism comes from a position of knowledge and understanding that you then pass on to the reader.
Thank you, though. Any more questions, particularly for Arifa? Yeah, Harper.
I have sort of a two-parter question, but for the first part, how did you sort of go about developing your opinions when you were earlier in your career? Because I feel like there could be a lot of uncertainty there. And then to follow up on that, have you ever taken back an opinion that you've had, or felt that a piece that you wrote maybe doesn't uphold to how you feel now?
Forming an opinion, that's such a life task. I think it's not so much forming an opinion, I think it's believing in your opinion. So there's something about an opinion, that you don't form. I think for me, there is a relationship to art that is quite, a gut response. And I think for me, everything is working back from that. In fact, believing in that gut response and also interrogating it. Is it prejudice that I don't like it? What is this gut response? So you're, really looking at the gut, but not ignoring that gut response. Even though it's a show that, you're supposed to like, that the next day every critic said it's 5 stars and you think it's 2 stars. That's not wrong, because that was a gut response, very strong, that you then worked back from. Why did I have this response to it? That's where the analysis kicks in. So I think a belief in your opinion, and then an ability to go from why did I feel this so strongly to being analytical about it. So the analysis and the emotion has to somehow meet. And I think and that's a muscle, that's a muscle, sort of it's a sort of muscle, So really figuring out why you feel certain things towards a painting, why this film really annoys you, why you loved something that you thought was really, it could be a naff musical that you absolutely made you cry and laugh. So working out the whys, that's the bit that I think is a practice. So it's not the opinion in itself. I don't think, and what's interesting is, I don't think I would often change my mind about a book or a play or a film. So this happened with Wuthering Heights. I read it at 17 and I didn't return to it for fear that I would hate it, because what does that say about the 17-year-old self? What does that say about taste, actually? And when I did read it, I read it when I was about 50, I avoided it for that. Now, obviously I saw adaptations, but I reread it at 50, and I thought, oh yeah, it's, because it's as much about me as it is about, it's about both the book and it is about me and my relationship. So when I'm scared about my response to a show that I sort of know that everybody else will love, or when I love a show that I know everybody else will hate. That happened to me. There was a really camp show called Burlesque a few months ago. It was messy, and I could see, and it had loads of negative PR. I could see people were going to hate it, and I could see what you could hate about it. I walked away on air. I found it imperfect and joyous, so I gave it 5 stars. And you just have to believe. You have to believe in your opinion, but also your feeling. And I'm sure if I go back to that show, I would love it still. I have changed my mind about a certain show. I wrote an opinion piece on a show called For Black Boys Who Have Thought of Committing Suicide or whatever. It's by Ryan Cameron, and it started off at a fringe show. It ended up in the West End. I love this playwright. He's a young black British playwright. He'd written something that I gave 5 stars to. I went to this Fringe theatre really excited, and I thought it was awful. I thought it was really naff. I thought the set was bad. It was all over the place. It was really like a piece of therapy. I thought, I can't bear this. What a shame. And I gave it 2 stars. And that was that. And then what happened then is that the Royal Court Theatre took that show and spent several months developing it. And then so I just knew this show was not very good. Then
Did they incorporate your comments?
I don't know. No, I don't think it was. I'd love to think it was me, but I think somebody else took charge. Somebody else co-directed it. Ryan Cameron started directing it himself. Money and time and resources pumped into it at the Royal Court. Anyway, I kept reading these 5-star reviews when it was at the Royal Court, and I thought, hang on a minute, I need to go back. So I went back, and it was so good, and I thought, how has this happened? So is it my instincts? Is it this? Is it that? And what had happened was it had been developed, and this proved to me
They spent
how
time on
they
it.
had spent time and money.
But you didn't change your mind.
I didn't change your mind.
It
It
changed.
It changed. So I suppose you're right. I didn't change my mind. It changed. So I think there's something very elemental about opinion in that you can't not be who you are. You can't be in anyone else's head but your own. So there's that as a baseline. But I think what you're crafting more and more and more is that you're adding layers of knowledge. Fine-tuning your analytical skills, working back from feeling to what it is that might have made you feel that way. Your own political agendas, but taking on the show's political agenda, critiquing it. Those are critical skills that you develop over time, and you develop your knowledge over time. So that you can spend forever developing. But I don't think you can. Your taste. Arguably, you can develop your taste by encountering more and more theatre.
The more you do, the more you understand.
The more you understand about your own
When I was
life.
writing about wine, the more I drank, the more I understood.
That's interesting. It's not how I think it probably was.
The more different wines I sample, the more
The
you're not.
squirkier you got.
I think you need to go.
Thank you so much. It's a
Thank
very
you.
lovely. Thank you for the
Thank you.
question.
Right, we'll see you. Yeah, we're just going to carry on for a bit with questions.
It's not me that's leaving, not anyone else.
Any more questions? Yes.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you perceive your relationship with your readers and your public, beyond them being just consumers of what you're selling.
I think it makes an enormous difference. I write these days. I write for trade papers. I write for Variety, which is the American entertainment Bible, as it were, and I write for the stage predominantly in the UK, and therefore I'm writing with practitioners, knowing that practitioners are reading it. But when I write elsewhere or when I'm broadcasting, I'm aware that I'm talking to a completely different audience, and therefore that doesn't change my opinion, but it determines the way in which I speak or write about something. And your responsibility is to your readers or your listeners. They're either paying the license fee if it's on the BBC, or they're buying the paper that you write for. And your job is to entertain them, rather than necessarily
Just to entertain?
explaining the artist's work back to them. And different papers obviously have different constituencies. When I was on the Independent, although the readership wasn't huge, the engagement with arts was massive, and therefore, and it's the same on the Observer, and that a good review in the Observer would really affect box office, and a good review in the Independent did, and you get good reviews in other places, and you go, yeah, but nobody. People at the Telegraph, the argument used to be, the people at the Telegraph wanted to, certainly on the Sunday, which had a very rural readership, they wanted to know whether the new Tom Stockwell play was good. They weren't necessarily going to go, however.
Presumably you were on the Observer for many years, you kind of knew your audience.
Yes.
You
and
knew
I think
exactly who you were catering for.
Yeah, I think there's a balance that I would try to strike between reviewing books in particular or other artworks or shows or exhibitions that we know that our readers are going to be interested in because they do have a certain range of interests that we know about. And then also surprising them a bit because otherwise it just can be a bit too predictable when they open their paper. There's nothing new, but it's new, but it's not something that they didn't expect to see there. So I think that for me as an editor, that's the sort of mix that you want to create.
Yeah.
It was a very good question. It was about the readers because well, it chimed with me anyway because nearly all the music reviewing I've done has been for papers that I wouldn't be a natural reader of.
It's still there was a question I was going to ask you.
I do sport for The Guardian, which I am a natural reader of, and that's great fun. And the readers write in, and the emails from the readers are so high quality. And The Guardian letters page is unbelievably good. I love the Mail on Sunday, but I don't have to say quite the same about the letters page, which tends to be a bit more ranty than The Guardian. And politically, I'm with The Guardian rather than with the Mail on Sunday. But the Mail on Sunday have never changed any hint of politics that occasionally pops up in popular news. I nearly always give Billy Bragg a rave review because he's a right old lefty. And they don't try and change that. So it doesn't actually much matter what the political complexion of the paper is, but it's quite on that question, it's quite a good thing if you're not a typical reader, because it forces you to think, what does the reader want here and what do they already know or not know? And it just makes you a bit more of a public service in a way, and a bit less of just going off on one, which when I worked for The Independent on Sunday long ago, I could go off on one a bit, because I was a typical reader.
I suppose it gives you a bit more confidence to understand that relationship more.
Yeah,
But you've been doing it
it sort
so
of keeps
long.
you honest in a way.
Keeps you honest, yeah.
I would say. I think it's not a bad thing to write slightly against the grain of the paper you're on, but
Yeah.
Yes, it makes you less lazy.
maybe I just want to think that.
Yes. I think that's a very good point. That kind of interface between you and the
Yeah, you
audience.
have to work a bit harder to get your point across.
Yeah, I think that's very
It
good.
can become a bit of an echo chamber.
Well, yeah. Okay, any more questions, please? Yes, Marcel.
Thank you very much. It was super interesting. I'm a lecturer here in journalism. So we're sitting in a building that's named after Stuart Hall, Professor Stuart Hall, Marxist historian, who founded cultural studies, which is very much kind of an ode to an appreciation of popular culture, which your work covers. I'm sure all your works have covered. Last year, I think that 25% of the academic staff in this university were made redundant. Last week, my former university threatened to suspend and obliterate the modern languages department, where people don't go to just learn languages, they go to study literature, politics, film. This is the arts and humanities being decimated. What do you think happens when spaces like these ones start closing in on such important cultural spaces? And what do you think is the future for people, for example, here? I mean, at least they're here, right?
Yeah.
But these
Thank you for
spaces
coming.
are under threat. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
It's so important. All the critics I've ever come across probably did an art subject at university. Not all of them necessarily went to university, because back in the day, not all journalists did, but I think these days, all journalists, nearly all journalists do. But yeah, it's really important because I thought about this when there was a question from up there about how do you form opinions. Well, you start doing it when you write essays. For A-level, it's not really there, probably up to GCSE, but as soon as you're 16, you are having to come up with a line, to what extent would you agree that Hitler was a weak dictator or whatever. So that's really important, and it's an education education for life, that stuff. It's not just, you know, the arts are not just the arts. They are so central to our lives. It's really important. It's so short-sighted to close arts courses or to close languages, especially languages tell us so much about the world.
I'll come to you in a minute. Just a quick response to that.
Yeah, I mean, the Philistinism behind the slow death of the humanities, well, no, it's not slow death, the attack on the humanities is terrifying because, you know, the idea that somehow a university education is vocational and you have to learn some things which you then use, and therefore learning a language. Well, everything works in English now. We don't need to learn languages, and you don't need to study art. You don't need to study plays. And you go, well, actually, good teaching of all those subjects. It doesn't matter what you studied at university. You learn how to form arguments. You learn how to form opinions. You learn how to argue a case. You learn empathy. You learn about another culture, and that makes you understand your own. All those things are vital, and the killing of it is cynical in the extreme and really scary.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make economic sense for the country either, because if we're going to be underfunding the arts and humanities in universities, then where do our next generation of not just critics but performers and creators come from? And that's an industry that's so important for our country. It's a massive export and it massively draws people in to visit us. So it just doesn't, it's so short-sighted, it doesn't make any sense.
Chris Martin from Coldplay, who's earning millions for our balance of payments as he goes around the world with his show, he went to University College London and read Latin and Greek.
I mean, one of the problems is, and we could talk about this all night, is the decline in English at A level, which then feeds into the arts and humanities and writers, and the consequent drop in people applying to do journalism and media studies at places like Goldsmiths.
But if it gets pushed underground by governments wanting everyone to do the STEM subjects, the arts will still, the flowers will come up through the cracks in pavement. The arts will still flourish, and they tend to do quite well in bad times. You know, punk rock happened at a very unpromising time in music history in 1976, when things were pretty depressed.
Things were very grim.
Things were grim, and you could hear that in the music of punk, and it re-energised popular music in a way that we can still feel now.
A gentleman right at the back had a question.
Just curious, do you think reviews ever appreciate over time? Or is the value of a review really at its peak the moment that it's published?
I think good reviews last. I have books of criticism by Kenneth Tynan, who was the lead theatre critic. He was the theatre critic of The Observer in the 1950s into the 60s. And you know, they're reviews of shows I've never seen and cannot see. And actually, without criticism, there is only marketing. And actually, if you look back, how do you evaluate what a play? You can rewatch a movie. You can suddenly get excited about films of Billy Wilder, and you can stream them seconds later. You can't recapture what it was like, what the original production of any play you can think of was, unless you go back and read the reviews. And the good ones, like Tynan, who was an energetic, really knowledgeable, really engaged writer, do give you a sense of that. It's one of the reasons criticism is important, because the reviews survive even though the theatre doesn't. And you can learn about paintings that you haven't seen, and you can only see in 2 dimensions, because you can't get to Madrid to see the Villa Prado or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good review is an art form in itself, and it can bring insight into not just the artwork that's being reviewed, but the time in which it was created and exhibited, and it can tell you so much more that it can definitely appreciate it.
I mean, the Clive James television reviews, we won't see those television programs, but they were made magnificent pieces of writing. But to take up your point about the performance art, things are changing because you can now, there's a lot of stuff online, you can see that, you know, through the NT Live, the National Theatre Live productions of a few years ago. And surely there's going to be a lot of that coming, so you can go back to it. You can't necessarily go back to it.
You can, but I'm the last person to denigrate NT Live, which, you know, is a fantastic resource, but it isn't the same as the real thing. And there are certain
it's
things.
not like being there.
It's not like being there, because the NT ones are better than most.
Yeah.
But they are not performed to camera. There's a camera on them. Whereas you watch a movie and the shot is lined up and you play to camera, or you know where the camera is and you act accordingly. Whereas it's a sort of one size fits all. I mean, it's not in olden days when you shoved a video camera at the back of the auditorium. It's more sophisticated than that, but it's still not the same as being there. I mean, I watched very, very little during the lockdown. I managed to write a column about theatre once a week for the entirety of lockdown, whilst not going to the theatre. I'm not quite sure how I did it, but I wouldn't really watch stuff on screen, because I found it, the composer and writer and director Jeremy Sands said the trouble with watching theatre on film is it's like looking at photographs of food, which I think is the best description. You've got everything except the flavour, the taste. It's at one remove. It's better than nothing. I'm really glad. But watching something like the Sophie Okonedo and Ralph Fiennes Antony and Cleopatra, yes. After 3 minutes I turned it off. It was unwatchable. Really? It just doesn't work. Whereas other things from NT Live had worked.
In the theatre, that was sensational.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're in it, yeah. rather than they're this size on your TV over there. You're not engaged.
And I saw the book, Alan Howard production, which was awful.
I had a question for David. So how did you write a review every week when you never watched any theatre during lockdown?
I wrote about plays, I wrote about performance ideas, I just sort of wrote about
in general.
Yeah. Rather than writing things that were inspired by the 3 things I saw this week.
So it was a column.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap it up now, I think. Because Lisa's got to rush off, but I just wanted to. We're going to carry on drinking outside, which Lisa's
Yes. Maybe she'll have a cheese straw.
Have a cheese straw, sip of wine. I just want to say massive thank you to thank you very much for those good questions. Let's go and continue the discussion.